Well, we know there are a number of various religions which exist all around the world. And in this entire series called Cults and the Occult, we're certainly going to touch on a fair amount of them. In these two lessons, tonight and of course the next one to follow, I want to focus in on the religions which really emanate from the western portion of the continent of Africa, as well as the eastern and western Caribbean. Now, to these indigenous worshipers, their religion just isn't something that is practiced on a Sunday. I have made mention to Dr. Walter Martin's book. That's really our main textbook as we go throughout this entire series. I want to quote from him now. He says, "A goat sacrifice to the correct deity may bring good luck to the petitioner. A spell cast by a priest may ensure a plentiful harvest, and a curse placed by a sorcerer may bring long overdue revenge. Woven into this busy religious fabric of deities, ceremony, and magic is the reality and presence of the ancestors, worthy relatives imbued with the power to change the lives of family members who please them through offerings and sacrifices." Well, we know according to the scriptures it is biblical to honor thy father and thy mother. Of course, that's in the Ten Commandments. That is biblical. What is totally unbiblical is to incorporate your relatives as a part of your worship. I'm going to touch on this a little bit later on in this lesson. But now, those of us that are in the West, we may giggle at such thoughts, the very ideas that Dr. Martin presented to us. But to these indigenous people, it is anything but foolish. With science, with government, which has, of course, failed to solve the world's problems, many people are flocking to the occult. And in these cases, these peoples are flocking back, you may say, to their ancestral or tribal roots. Now, it is clearly beyond the scope of our studies to try and investigate all of these religions. I'm certainly going to try and do my best in the next two lessons to at least give you a nice overview, and then, of course, you can do your own study. But these rites and ceremonies have been handed down from generation to generation to generation. Dr. Martin, again, he writes, "The Yoruba of West Africa survived centuries of the slave trade, successfully transporting their religion to Europe, America, and the Caribbean. They influenced the Caribbean and South Americas, laying a fertile foundation for the birth and growth of voodoo in all its varied forms. Native Americans lost the land they love, but after a brief indoctrination into Christianity, they largely shunned the religion of the white man and clung, in the face of incredible opposition, to the teachings of the elders. A wealth of spiritist and New Age 20th century doctrine fed a contingent of hungry disciples recently divorced from the almighty realm of science and eager to revere Native American spirituality. All of these cultures fought to the death simply to survive, and they successfully illustrate today the flexibility and staying power of traditional religions." Now, unlike the gods and the goddesses which were worshipped by the pagans of the ancient Near East, the religions of Africa and of the Caribbean, for the most part, serve a supreme being. And that's the term that they would use, a supreme being. Now, this supreme being, according to these various religions, could be referred to as Father. This supreme being could be referred to as Creator. This supreme being could be referred to as the invisible, such as the wind. He is eternal. The supreme being is omnipotent. In Africa, This supreme being, at least one of these religions, is known as the Pa Kurumbasba. And this Pa Kurumbasba is the supreme creator. He demands reverence and he demands sacrifices. There's a book entitled African Religions and Philosophy by John Mbidi. And he writes, he said, there are many things held to be morally wrong. Now he's referring to this particular God and this particular religion. And you'll find out that a lot of what is in this particular religion you would say coincides with what we believe. Listen, he goes, there are many things held to be morally wrong and evil, such as robbery, murder, rape, telling lies, stealing, being cruel, saying bad words, showing disrespect, practicing sorcery or witchcraft, interfering with public rights, backbiting, being lazy or greedy or selfish, making promises, and so on. Well, we would hear that kind of list and we would think, oh, that's what we believe. It can't be that far off. As I was doing my studies in preparation of this, I was surprised that in the continent of Africa, not only are there 53 different countries, but what I did not know was that there are over 1,000 different languages. 1,000 different languages in the continent of Africa alone. And if you've seen any kind of National Geographic show or Discovery Channel or Animal Planet or any of those things, I think we're all in agreement. The continent is absolutely beautiful. It's very scenic. But unfortunately, it is teeming with the occult. When the Arabs and the Portuguese, and those were, let's say, the main drivers, how about that, of the slave trade of the, let's say, the 14th century, the 15th, the 16th century. When the Arabs and the Portuguese, and of course along with a number of other European slave traders, when they raided the western coast of Africa, they took families and they ripped them apart. Husbands were ripped apart from their families. Mothers were ripped apart from their children. Children were ripped apart from their families. These slave traders could care less about community. And you have to understand, as we move on in our lesson, that the African culture depended on its religion. And the African religion depended on its culture. They are two sides of the same coin. Once again, the African culture depended on its religion, and the African religion depended on its culture. Now, in the West, we do not understand that. In the West, let's just say, and especially here in America, we are very independent. It's about climbing the corporate ladder. It's about chasing the American dream, right? Oh, hey, owning your own home, having your own car, whatnot. Americans are incredibly materialistic. And as the years are going on, America is becoming an irreligious nation. And I'm afraid to say probably in about 2 generations we may be a pagan nation. But in Africa, the culture and the religion are 2 peas in a pod. Now, before we move on, and we talk about the ancestry and the elders, we must understand what does the Bible say concerning the abode of our dead relatives, those who have passed. Obviously, we understand those who are saved, absent from the body, present with the Lord. But then there are those who are lost. And when they pass, what happens? Well, we understand what Yeshua teaches, Luke chapter 16, very well-known passage. Now there was a rich man, and he habitually dressed in purple and fine linen, joyously living in splendor every day. And a poor man named Lazarus was laid at his gate, covered with sores, and longing to be fed with the crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. Besides, even the dogs were coming and licking his sores. Now the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, so that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. But now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, there is a great chasm fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you will not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. So you must understand, biblically speaking, it might sound soothing to someone who has lost somebody. You've probably heard numerous times, my mother of sweet memory, she's my guardian angel now. Or my husband, we were married for all these years, he's my guardian angel now. Biblically speaking, that is incorrect. The concept of a relative becoming our guardian angel is not biblical. But it is pagan. It is pagan. Now, although there are many African religions, there are certain characteristics interesting enough that actually unite them. And here are some of them. First off, there are powerful forces which exist in the universe, and they can be consulted and utilized. The African people view the world as a dangerous place, filled with spirits of all kinds, and in this belief they have much in common with the Sumerians and the Babylonians. At any given moment, it is possible that someone or something may cause harm, and precautions must be taken to prevent this harm from occurring. The Supreme Being allows lesser gods to intervene in the affairs of men, and the existence of lesser gods means a chance to circumvent the negative actions of others. A priest must approach the gods on behalf of the individual. A person cannot approach the gods on his or her own. Now, with that last statement, a person cannot approach the gods on his or her own, but what does your Bible say? Ephesians 2:18, for through Yeshua we have access to one Spirit to the Father. So yes, we can approach God. 1 John 3, Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God, and whatever we ask we receive from Him. Secondly, fate is one of the powerful forces, but it can be defeated by the divine trickster, another separate force. Fate is a force separate from all gods. Africans, like many people throughout history, believe that the events in a person's lifetime are predestined. But the African solution to this dilemma remains unique. A being called the divine trickster. Thirdly, natural spirits inhabit the same spiritual plane as the spirits of deceased ancestors. All spirits can physically influence the living. Ancestors are considered essential to the well-being of any African. They act as personal intercessors for their family, to the Supreme Creator and lesser gods, and as such must be treated with the greatest respect, but only if that respect was earned during their lifetime. Not all ancestors are worthy. Only those who showed concern for their family by creating descendants and living a life of honor are remembered daily by those who remain. A place for honored ancestors is set at meals, and family members may speak directly to the empty place. They know that an ancestor will always be willing to help when needed. Although some scholars claim that Africans do not worship their ancestors, the daily behaviors they exhibit are historically connected to worship. They speak aloud to ancestors about daily problems and family matters. They organize celebrations in their ancestors' honor, and they ask their ancestors to do extraordinary things that a human being is not capable of doing. They also believe that ancestors can choose to return to life in the bodies of their children. This daily link to the invisible is another expression of the strong bond Africans feel to everything in the world around them, both seen and unseen. Fourthly, all things, trees, rocks, rivers, are inhabited by spirits that were never human. For the African, the oxygen surrounding them is not simply air, it is a spiritual space filled with all kinds of spirit beings. While the ancestor's body may decay, the ancestor himself has simply stepped from this world into the next, and he now occupies a physical space alongside many different kinds of spirits. The spirits he shares space with may reside in rocks or trees. They are free to move about and yet tethered to those physical objects. They can leave the rock, but probably not venture far from it. What did God tell Israel after they had left Egypt? Exodus 20. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image of any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or is that in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. Fifthly, religion and magic are almost inseparable. Both work in conjunction with powerful spirit forces. Perhaps the most influential belief at the center of African religions is the power of magic to determine the fate of human beings. Magic can influence the gods, the spirits, and the ancestors to effect tremendous changes in everyday life. It is inextricably intertwined with religion itself to the point where, at times, they are one and the same. Sixthly, retribution will follow immediately for any evil acts. There is no end of the world and no judgment day. It is believed that the gods will swiftly punish anyone who has committed evil, and the individual has only a short time to petition the gods to make things right before they are punished. This quick retribution is meant to mold character and enforce respect for the community. So if you notice, there's no judgment day. But what do the scriptures say? Hebrews 9:27. And inasmuch as it is appointed for men to die once, and after this comes judgment. Revelation 20, beginning in verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged for the things which were written in the books, according to their deeds. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, every one of them according to their deeds. So there is a judgment day. Well, when those slave ships took the Africans on board and broke up their families, they took their Africans on board to do their slave trading. It wasn't just ordinary men that they put on the slave ships, and it wasn't just ordinary women that they put on the slave ships, and it wasn't just children that were torn apart from their parents. Occultic priests were taken as well. They were taken as well. They were put on those slave ships, and they were sold. And what do you think those occultic priests did when they landed in their new environment? Do you think they left their religions behind? Not on your life. Dr. Martin writes, the plunder of the West African coast brought with it the influence of West African religion, and nowhere can this be seen more clearly than in the survival of the Yoruba tribal beliefs. Within the cosmology of this people, lie the roots of what would come to be known as voodoo. In the Caribbean, the roots of Africa run deep. The belief in the Supreme Being was transported to the early 16th century, with the slaves eventually blending with Catholicism to produce a unique system of worship. Voodoo, in essence, is the worship of African deities and spirits overlaid with key elements of Catholicism. Now, Dr. Martin mentioned the Yoruba culture, the Yoruba tribes. This culture, by the way, goes back 2,500 years, before 500 before the Common Era. Predominantly southwest Nigeria. The high god of this particular culture is Olodumare. Some of the major principles in their culture, of course, conflict, predestiny, struggle, sacrifice, good character, nature, afterlife, and that's just really the tip of the iceberg of this occult-like group. Sociologist Roland Pierre writes, this syncretism can be observed on three levels. First, that of the pantheon. Second, that of the liturgical calendar. Thirdly, that of the sacramentary cult. But this quote-unquote civil syncretism is not in any way a fusion, nor a synthesis, nor an amalgam, but only a white mask put on over black skin. The voodoo has kept its religious originality in spite of the Catholic cloak, which circumstances have obliged it to raise in front of its cultural face, and in spite of the Christian ingredients, which it uses by reinterpreting them so as to reinforce its magical effectiveness. Again, you think those occultic priests left their religion behind? No, they took it with them, and they blended it with what? The white man's religion. Dr. Martin writes, the isolation of the Caribbean islands provided a unique setting for the development of religious ideas that mixed the traditions of African religions, European Catholicism, American Protestant, and folklore superstition in a unique amalgamation of beliefs. Protestant and Catholic missionaries introduced the power and authority of Jesus Christ, his disciples, Mary, and various saints, that eventually became integral to occult rituals. Through this, the island groups broke stride with their European and African counterparts in that they were not truly Yoruba, Catholic, or Protestant, but a distinctive blend of ideology that retained only trace elements of the original influences. This unique religious melting pot, consisting of God, magic, demigods, spirit gods, and ancestral spirit worship, birthed new and influential worldviews throughout the Caribbean islands. What is interesting about these various religious groups? When you look at, let's say, Mormonism, of course, you have the Book of Mormon. When you talk about Jehovah's Witness, you're talking about the Watchtower. Islam, of course, is the Quran. But with these religious groups, there really is no set canonical scripture. Maybe perhaps different books that certain tribes may use, but you can't point to one set canon of scripture. Now, whether we're in the West Indies or whether it would be in the Caribbean islands, it's not as if you would find, for the most part, these traditions and these ceremonies written down, but for the most part, the traditions were handed down orally. They're handed down orally. I'm going to touch on just a couple of them real quick, and then we'll finish our lesson for tonight. The first one, just want to touch on, is called the Obi. Now, some pronounce it Obia. This particular one thrives mostly in Jamaica and the British West Indies. It is a form of spirit control where the practitioner uses magic and spiritism to exercise power or authority over another person or event. Obia can be used to gain position or money, keep someone from a promotion, or even steal someone's spouse. Mial. Mial is an African Jamaican cult whose beginning is uncertain, most likely from the Ashanti people of Togo and the Ivory Coast. Mial, originally composed exclusively of males, now a Mial man or woman, is usually a healing practitioner who uses a combination of Christian teachings, Caribbean religious traditions, herbal medicine, and dance rituals. Its teaching strictly opposes Obeah and developed its own counter-rituals to free people from Obeah spirits, spells, and magic. Then you have Santeria, the Way of the Saints. This particular group, mainly made up of former southern Nigerians, is a blend of Yoruba and Catholic beliefs, with an emphasis on the occult, demon possession, trance states, used to communicate with ancestors, ritual drums and dances, and ceremonial slayings of goats, lambs, and chickens. Its largest contingent of followers is in Cuba, the West Indies, and other Caribbean islands, but its numbers grew in the United States during the 20th century due to the arrival of Cuban refugees. It's at this point I want to go ahead and we're going to pause our lesson. When we continue with the final part, I'm really going to focus then on voodoo, Haitian voodoo, and then you'll also see that voodoo is not really exclusive just to the country of Haiti. It spreads far beyond that as well. That'll be in our next lesson.